Peace community. Welcome to All Things Genuine Podcast. I am your host, Demetria. If you are new, welcome. And if you are returning, welcome back. Gratitude for each of you tuning in and joining me on this genuine journey. Today is Thursday, October 23rd, 2025, and I am back with another genuine episode. And at this very moment in time, I don't necessarily have a title, but I do have some notes to keep myself in alignment. And before I begin, I do want to say to those of you tuning in, I hope that everyone is doing well and that you're also finding ways to ground yourselves. And speaking of grounding yourselves, for me personally, when I'm not recording on the microphone for, let's say, weeks or even months at a time, I associate those very actions with practicing grounding. Whenever I'm guided to protect my energy, I will do those very things. So, without further ado, I'll go ahead and get into the inspiration for today's episode. It would be late September of this year, 2025, when the world would find that Assata Shakur had transitioned. If you aren't familiar with who she is, I implore you in this moment to get acquainted with who she was and what she represented for us as melanated indigenous people, as well as all indigenous people when it came to liberation. I want to take a moment to acknowledge and honor Assata, and I'm going to share something with you all. It was before she transitioned, and I want to say this was years ago. I was guided, I feel, to watch documentaries on individuals who led the civil rights movements and, well, more specifically, it was a spectrum. Like, it was civil rights movements, and it was movements that were specifically for Black power and the liberation of Black people, the Black Panther Party specifically. And I just remember watching documentary after documentary after documentary, and I was so moved. And I remember watching a documentary about Asada, and what was so interesting about her story, I find it to be a multitude of things, actually, because even though she endured a lot, just even, being a part of the Black Panther Party movement, when she escaped to Cuba, she shared so much more about that experience. And I just remember being moved and hearing her speak about spirituality and all of the things that she found that we as a people had been missing by being in the Western and, the United States, or better known as Turtle Island. And if you know, do your due diligence in researching. But Asada was very powerful. Her story was very inspirational. And I just wanted to share that, like I said, before she transitioned, I had been on a journey to purchase her autobiography, and I didn't pick it up. I ended up getting a different book that day specifically, and I think it was either earlier this year or last year when I was searching. And at the time, they only had one copy in the store, and I remember telling the lady, I'll come back and get it. And since then, I've picked up other novels and books and things of that nature, and I have yet to go back. But now I'm going to make it my business to get that book for, that purpose, because I really would like to read more um, indefinitely into her story. Like, I want to see what she wrote and what all she wanted to talk about in that book. But I wanted to take that moment to just share that about Assata. Once again, if you are not familiar with who she is, I implore you to get acquainted with who she was and what she represented. And I'm going to move further along to my second inspiration for today's episode. And I'm going to be honest, this second inspiration really put fire up under me to get on this microphone and start recording. And I speak of no other than D'Angelo. And D'Angelo happened to go, or transition, I shall say, a couple of weeks or maybe a week or so, if I'm not mistaken, after Assata. And these are two individuals whom I really adore. I really, like I said, I admire Assata's story. And when it comes to D'Angelo, musically, cosmically, and even just spiritually, and I feel like a plethora of other things, because I feel excuse me, all of this information is coming through. And I'm just getting excited because it seems to me that as D'Angelo has transitioned, layers upon layers have been pulled back about him as a person and him as an artist. And I've been so moved. I've been so impacted. And honestly, I didn't feel that level of grief and sadness since, Nipsey Hussle's passing. And it really moved me, and especially to see how collectively, culturally, especially, speaking of those of us who are of melanated descent, D'Angelo is a sacred um voice, his music. If you know, you know. I'll name a few: Lady, Brown Sugar, Devil's Pie. And I love that record for so many reasons. But the first place I heard that record was on the film called Belly. If you know, you know. And I never let it go. And I had listened some years ago. I want to say it was the year of 2022, and I was really in tune with the music and the frequencies that I was consuming. Or, you know what, better yet, let me not say consuming, that I was opening myself up to. I'll say that. I was really mindful about the people I was listening to. I was listening to a bit of oldies, some newbies, from Mariah the Scientist to Bob Marley. And D'Angelo was one of the many that I played, and Devil's Pie specifically, because he spoke to a lot of what we're seeing in society right now. People lining up to get a slice. And just listen to the song if you have, the space and the time and you feel guided to do so. I love the record. I felt that it was beautiful. All of the tones, how he mixed, his vocals with a bit of hip hop and this and that. I just feel like D'Angelo was really special. And I see the shift that has taken place. You know, every time a soul transitions and goes on to wherever they're going, wherever they travel to, after this life here, there's always a shift within humanity. I mean, just think about it. For example, I study a lot of things, from all aspects of this life and this experience of mine. And one aspect that I've naturally studied is the cosmos and energy. And for example, I'm going to be very brief in my esoteric acknowledgement, but this is regarding a very unfortunate but fortunate event because it shifted and it impacted humanity in a way that I myself had never ever witnessed. In 2020, there was an injustice done to someone whose sun placement shined in the energy of justice. And who I speak of specifically in this moment is George Floyd. Most of us, those who, were guided to look or just saw it because it was everywhere, all over the internet and social media. We all seen what took place. And I remember humanity raising or rising up in such a way that, like I said again, I'd never witnessed. And I too was moved, and I'll never forget. I was I was getting ready to, suit and boot me and my baby boy up at the time to go protest, to go, make my voice be heard along with, some others because I'm like, this could be, my brother, this could be my family, this could be a friend, this could be anybody, that's, of resonance. And I just remember being so moved and seeing what I saw on video and that energy. Everybody saw on video what law enforcement did, you know, in a just unjust way, in a very, I don't even have words. And that's why it's finding me, it's taking me some time to find the things to say. But we all seen how energy played when it came to George Floyd. And I didn't know until years later, like, wow, he's, of resonance with me when it comes to that energy of justice, of fairness, of equality and balance, and overall keeping that harmony because that is what we need within humanity. And when that took place with him, I feel like we saw a shift. And once again, I'm going to bring it back to the inspiration. With D'Angelo, there's so many things that people are starting to see and put together, musically and what he gifted to us just with his music and his presence. I am so grateful. And of course, like I said, this is the most grief that I've shown or I've had for an artist in a while. So I really, am appreciative of all of the art that I'm seeing, all of the dialogue that I'm seeing, all of the heart chakra openings that I'm seeing. And I'm not the only one witnessing this, but I feel that, everything happens for a reason. And life in itself is to be experienced and it is to be celebrated in essence. And in life and in death, we can all gain and learn and shift, consciousness, our realities, our, gratitude, and just what human beings are giving. Even, D'Angelo, down to his masculinity, his humanity, his vulnerability, like I feel like all of those things were so special. And I'm just so grateful to have lived in a lifetime to experience, the tones of his vocals and what it did for the culture. And to have men sing, especially a black man, to sing, to women and just in the way that he did it, made D'Angelo and Assata travel safely. They both blessed humanity greatly. And I'm going to move further along because I didn't want to spend too long with the inspiration. But D'Angelo, once again, he really, that shift and that transition really got me to move because he's in my library. I listen to his music, here and there. I won't say I play it super often, like on a daily basis, but best believe he's in rotation. And I just, I've been really saddened, but in the same breath, simultaneously, I've been in gratitude for, the process and the evolution of life in itself. So let me go ahead and keep moving because I'll go on and on and on and on. Shout out Badu. So I next want to genuinely speak about frequency because with the impact, with the shifts comes a sense of, not even just a sense of, there's a frequency shift. The frequency has been more, sensual. And I don't mean to associate, sensuality with sexuality. It's just one being in tune with their natural abilities, nature in itself. And I'm seeing the shift, in the frequency of the collective. There's like this opening, this eye opening to sensitivities, and especially within men in the collective. I love to see divine masculinity, and all that is men being in their nature, because we all, once again, this is a bit esoteric in nature for those who aren't familiar with such terms. And if you are, you are, that's cool. But I just wanted to expand for those of you who may be new to this whole verbiage that um, this consciousness on the planet has heightened us to all be, using. But getting back to what I was saying about this very moment in time, I love to see the frequency. I love to see divine masculinity. And what I was going to say was that we all embody both divine feminine energy and divine masculine energy. The feminine aspect is just one's ability to receive, one's ability to be nurturing, caring, and all of those things that we associate with the feminine. And when I speak of masculine, it's just the ability to protect, the ability to act, the ability to assert ourselves, whether we do so passionately, just the whole, I hope that I'm making sense because I want to say so without yapping, as my son would say. But moving further into the topic of frequency, with this shift, with the transitions I'm seeing within the collective, it's making me really zoom in more on the present moment and what frequency I'm embodying, what frequency am I tuning into, what frequencies are around me and influencing me even. And I told you all, I really enjoy watching documentaries, especially documentaries speaking about actual factual things that took place, and especially when it's regarding justice. Like, I'm real big on justice and equality and humanity and so many other things. But when I look back at those documentaries that I've watched and that I still watch till this day to just refresh my memory, just to go back and maybe hear something that I didn't get to hear, or maybe receive something in that documentary that maybe my consciousness couldn't really receive in essence. But I look back at the times, especially regarding, civil rights movements and the inequality and the injustices that our ancestors experienced, and those of melanated, indigenous descent, as well as native indigenous descent. I look back at those times and I look back at how courageous and how inspirational and how powerful those movements were. And then I look at how life, existed. I see a lot of individuals at this time, think and I love to see it. I love to see the different levels. I love to see how individuals are even willing to have this dialogue regarding, life, under oppression, under, an apartheid, under an occupation. I think about how our ancestors still managed to create life, create art, create music, perform, and so much more, and even create generations, right? Because they didn't stop making babies, they didn't stop. Doing all of these things. And I had this awakening years ago, as I've been very vocal and I've shared with you all in the community regarding, fragments and parts of my awakening, which is so expansive. But I'm going to share this piece regarding, the frequency and how nature still is nature. And wow, I'm getting a download as I'm saying this. And I hope I remember to go back to this. But years ago, at the peak of one of my greatest awakenings, I remember just going through that phase of just pure bliss, like pure bliss. And I told y'all how I started to, I was always in nature. I would go on walks like all the time, and I still do to this day. But at the beginning, I was like really on a walk with Holy Spirit, as I would call, and I would feel in my presence. I feel like God would guide me daily to go on walks and really appreciate the beauty in nature, and just really embody and align with that energy naturally. But I remember like changing my ways of eating. I went through a whole change on food frequency, because there's frequency in food as well. Like the topic around frequency, I may make this into another topic and do a more expansive view on frequency. But just to keep it all in accordance with my notes and what I wanted to talk to you all about tonight, I'm going to keep it, brief. But back to my, shared experience when it came to my awakening. I'll never forget when I was, into the whole, God body, and I still am, but I was really, really, learning and just being a student at best. I'll never forget. I was like, okay, I'm eating watermelon. I'm eating this. I'm eating that. I'm drinking this. I got tea. Okay, cut that out. No meat, this, that. I can replace this. And I remember going out to the groceries and just looking for foods, with intention, also thinking about the frequency, the colors, and the vibrancy. And I remember just thinking about the fruit, right? And most fruit, well, to my knowledge and to what I've, noticed, I'll just speak of one aspect: fruit bearing from a tree. and how Most High created those very things and created them abundantly. And I remember walking around and seeing price tags on this and that and thinking to myself, how did we get here? How did we get here? I'm telling you, for me, the awakening was just like that. And I know it's different for everybody because we all receive initiations differently, and some don't awaken. And honestly, that is how it's supposed to be. And we're not here, to force things. So we all were given the birthright to have free will. And I just see things from a different perspective, if not perspectives. But back to what I was realizing while, in these groceries shopping, I was looking at price tags and analyzing and just thinking about this. Like, how did we get here as humanity? How did we get here, from such an abundance and having that birthright? Why do I, you, me, you, they, why is it that there's a price tag on everything, especially things that come from trees and nature specifically? And I remember taking those thoughts with me on my walks, and, just my consciousness was just heightening and heightening. And I would see birds, I would see cardinals, I would see all kinds of nature and wildlife outside. And I would see them, courting and mating. You have certain seasons where you see things. And I'm like looking around at humanity and even myself in that moment, right? I'm having a moment of introspection and reflection. I'm like, even you, Demetria, you've been in that phase or in that space where you thought this way before you fully awaken. And what I'm talking about specifically is how humanity has been altered. How over the years you'll see our great grandmothers, our grandmothers, and even our mothers. Notice how, for me specifically, my grandparents on my mother's side, 13 children and married together, all 13 children together. And then it goes on to my grandfather, and then it goes on to my mother, and so on and so forth. I don't know about you all. Maybe your family's different, and maybe you see what I'm seeing as well from this perspective. But it seems as though from generation to generation, as we've equipped and adapted ourselves and we've been altered as humans, lesser and lesser children are being produced. You know what I mean? We're not seeing marriages, and don't get me wrong, that's a whole nother topic, talking about the era where women and men stayed married in their mess and just, traumatic situations. And I'm in no way, shape, or form, acknowledging or honoring that type of scenario. But what I am saying is that, from a love standpoint, right? From a foundational standpoint where love was actually valued, love was actually genuine, love wasn't something that was just said and, just for verbiage. It was meant. And out of that love, generations were created. We're not really seeing, much of that nowadays. It seems to get, less frequent and less familiar. It's like a rarity to see families sticking together or even, having a healthy foundation. We don't really get to see that as often. And I just wanted to mention that. And, back to frequency and how I was seeing, things misaligning. Why is it that you have the bees, the birds, the giraffes, the monkeys, the lions, And I know I mentioned birds, but I'm going to say eagles as well to add that in. Why is it that we never seen them eating outside of their natural diets? But when you look here on planet Earth, you see us and we are eating everything. We eat everything, including, you know, meats. And I know that's another topic as well for another conversation. And this in no way, shape, or form is meant to make a judgment because, hey, your girl, I could test some chicken up. And that was one of the things that I let go last. And I have moments where I've slipped, I'm not perfect, but when you have that consciousness and that awareness, you know, even if you try it, I know for me, my body would reject it and it would continue. It still does it to this day. And that's just a confirmation for me to let me know that my body is working properly. When we are um eating things, drinking things, I think it's important to listen to your body and our bodies essentially because your body will definitely let you know. But back to the frequency of, seeing things from how I'm seeing things. I'm like, okay, well, why is it that these animals don't need a nutritionist, but we as humans need it? And don't get me wrong, I know some things are in place and needed to a certain degree, but honestly, naturally speaking, why is that? And I had these thoughts years ago, and I bring it back to the frequency because I was thinking while I was away a lot about art, a lot about our culture. I was thinking about our ancestors and those before us who made a way, who showed up in the face of inequality, oppression, police brutality, etc. I've been thinking about that. I listen to music that is way before my time. And I listen to not only the melody, but I listen to the lyrics and what the artists are saying and what they have been saying for decades upon decades. And it really blows my mind because right now we're in a time of utter chaos. And it's chaos like we haven't seen as a generation. And not to say that one was more extreme than the other, because extreme is extreme to me. Violence is violence. And, this is just beyond at this point, right? I feel like violence doesn't even do, it justice when it comes to the actions that we're witnessing on this planet. But I think a lot about how those artists showed up, right? And I think a lot about how my grandmother's generation existed. And she was a part of that. My grandmother would share stories with me, really briefly. She would share stories with me, about what she experienced, what her, family experienced and her people, of melanated, indigenous descent. And my grandmother also shared with me that, native, indigenous descent is also very much dominant in my lineage. And she would talk about how they experience inequality, racism, and, having to walk from her home to an all black school, because at that time things were segregated and they were not allowed to share spaces with white people. So she really shared, and I would just sit and I would just really take in all of the wisdom, all of the knowledge, all of the stories, and really take that with me still here to this day. And I think about how even her generation, they created my mother's generation, and so on and so forth, in the face of racism, inequality, police brutality, and so on and so forth. Not to sound redundant, but I think about my generation now, and I'm a millennial, and we are currently the adults who are in a position to pivot and shift the collective, the narrative, especially when it comes to those of us who have children. And even if you don't, my hope for those of you who are in tune with their humanity, right? You have empathy, you have compassion, and you see things from a higher perspective. You know, we are the ones who are in a position, that same position as our very ancestors once were. They had an opportunity and a choice to fight, to stand up, to unite, to love one another, to come together. And, I'm going to also mention something briefly when I speak on loving one another. I heard another artistic intellectual, as she would prefer and love to be called, and I speak of Miss Amanda Seals. I heard her speak about this briefly while watching her content that she shared. She spoke about how, us as a people, and when I say a people of, melanated descent, how we've got a long ways to go, because we have certain people who are in the same breath honoring a revolutionary while honoring someone who is completely gone against what it means to be a revolutionary in essence. And I really resonate with the things that she shared on those topics. And I'm not going to say it verbatim, but she spoke to that. And I'm very well aware of that as well. That when I speak on loving one another, I myself have been called the villain in a lot of people's stories, especially, you know, as I've set boundaries, as I've quote unquote burnt bridges. But as I sit here in the present moment and I think about what that means when I hear those very things, such as, well, you've burnt bridges, you've done this. What's at the very root of those burnt bridges was Demetria simply standing up for herself, setting a boundary, and just having the audacity to really stand up for myself, and that's what that means, to burn a bridge. And that's why I sleep peacefully, because it wasn't me necessarily making or taking an action that I couldn't sit with, that I couldn't be accountable for, because most times than not, when I've crossed lines, when I too myself as a human, cross that line, make a mistake. And I want to be mindful when I say mistake, because at our ages, there's only so much room to make mistakes when you know better, right? That's wisdom. But I have no issue overall with being accountable, and I'll leave that there. But I'm aware that there's a, collective, there's a group of individuals that are not willing to heal, that are not willing to be accountable, that are not willing to love one another, that are just not willing. And we have to collectively, those of us who have this higher perspective and are expanding and are healing, we have to be able to separate that knowing and just hold space for those who are willing. And that's what I have to say to that without sounding completely contradicting in what I'm sharing. But I feel like I've spent a lot of time on frequency. But just to wrap it up, in this current moment in time, I really feel that it's going to be so vital that artists utilize their platforms, intentionally and reflect the times that we are living. Because at the end of the day, artistry is just that, reflecting one's times in a very creative and, expressive way, at least I would like to say. But I think it's going to be very important that we do that as creators, contributors, however you are showing up in this moment when it comes to shifting humanity, shifting your reality, even, because mindset is another thing. And when you have your mind in alignment, that also comes with different frequencies, higher vibrating frequencies, because your mindset is shifting, especially when it comes to wanting to change your reality or even manifesting. You have to believe in order to see what it is that you're manifesting and or desiring, I shall say, because at the root of manifestation, it's just desire. That's all it is. And wanting to align with that vibration. And moving further along, I think I'm going to wrap it up with frequency. Let me see my notes to make sure that I'm in alignment. I'm going to move from frequency into messaging. And I simply notated the message, the movement, and mainstream. And my intention for writing those three things was simply to highlight or expand. That's the better term that I should be using, to expand on frequency. When I talked about frequency, especially when it comes to reflecting the times that we're in, when it comes to artists, I feel like the messages should be rooted. The messages should be in alignment with the frequency of the movement. I feel that when the Black Panther Party was established, when the civil rights movements were established, when I think about the music that was shared, that was listened to, that was played at events, at movements, it was all reflective. Aretha Franklin, for example, Marvin Gaye, and may I say, and might I add a little bit of esoteric knowledge, cosmically speaking, about how energy and how the stars are always aligning. For example, both Aretha Franklin and Marvin Gaye both have Aries in their sun placement. And I shared a little bit about the sign of Aries, specifically relating to our celestial bodies. The head is ruled by Aries, and it is the very start of everything. Even when we talk about the spring, And this is why it is also a part of the cardinal signs. And it's so funny because I have a cardinal tatted on my hand, and I didn't know until like further along in my awakening that my sign placement was a part of the cardinals. And that specifically means that the cosmic sign starts off a season. Like, for example, Aries, once again, kick starts off the beginning of spring season. Then we have Cancer kicking off the summer. And then we have Libra with the autumn. And then we have Capricorn with winter, and so on and so forth as the elements change. But I wanted to speak to that because everything aligns, everything connects in essence. And back to what I was saying about the message, the movement, and mainstream, and specifically, mentioning those two artists, their music was reflective of the times that our ancestors were experiencing. And I found that to be so inspirational. And I look around right now, like I said, I see, some artists really utilizing their art and their platform for intentional, purposeful reasons. And I love to see it. And we need more of that. We need music and art and performances, film, whatever it is that we can, create and while navigating oppression and standing up to, these type of things within humanity. I feel like it's very vital and it's needed. And I just wanted to talk about the importance of, the message with the movement and, mainstream, because mainstream right now, when you take a listen, there's not a lot of um intentional mainstream purposeful music, or I shall say art, in such a way. And there are some, don't get me wrong, I do appreciate and I am highly appreciative of the artists who are, making waves and showing up. And honestly, moving forward, that's really all I want to make space for, because why even create and give energy to the things that are not in alignment for me or you, and especially when it comes to humanity. I'm really big on those things right now. I feel I have a responsibility, even just sitting here with this microphone. I know a lot of people have their say so's about, people not deserving, being deserving of having a platform or having a microphone. And I feel that since I've started this journey, genuinely, it's expanded, to a degree over time, because at the root of it, it's all genuine. And I've been very vocal, I've been very transparent, and even vulnerable, I feel, to a certain degree, because some people will just go into hermit, and to each his own, because I love being a hermit. I love time to myself. I love, when I'm in that, season of preparation and isolation, because I come out more sharp than ever. I come out with more wisdom than ever. And I just, I really honor those spaces in my life. But moving further along, let me look at the last note, and then I'm going to wrap up this episode, because I feel like I've been talking and talking and talking. So, I hope that you all have gotten comfortable, whether you're listening to it, on your way to and from, in the, car, or through your headphones. I'm really appreciative if you're still listening, this long. But what I want to also talk about is navigating shadow banning, when it comes to platforms and algorithms. And I want to go beyond the limitations and restrictions in order to reach the masses. And when I speak of masses, it reminds me of a conversation that I'd had some time ago. And it was about, starting this journey of podcasting. And at that time, in my city where I'm from, not many people were savvy or talking about podcasting as heavily. You know, I remember talking to people about how to navigate where to find the application because it's installed in every Apple user's phone specifically, and you can get it on Android and, a plethora of other devices. But I remember then having an awakening that I've created this platform and I took notice that not many people are aware or even care to talk about podcasts. Let me go ahead and hone in and just look past my city limits. I want to reach the masses. And it really shifted and impacted me on such a expansive level because I went from only wanting to reach those in my city to wanting to reach those on the planet. Like, that's how I think outside of the box, outside of limitations, outside of restrictions, and it's led me here. And when I think about that, I've been vocal about this too as well. I really don't care when I'm online, because I'm not here to perform. I'm here to create, to share, to network, to collaborate, to connect outside of the internet, on the internet, and really engage with other humans. So I'm aware that I've been, notified, I've been warned, I've been given, restrictions on my platform, and it's been baffling and simultaneously, intriguing and hysterical at most because the things that I get warnings about, y'all, I'm just who I am. I'm just one piece to this massive puzzle, and I'm just sharing light and enlightening the collective and sharing that, and I feel like sharing is caring. And I've always been taught that, and I'll always carry that with me. And navigating through the shadow banning and the warnings and the restrictions and the limiting things that they put in place, it got me to thinking about a lot of things, especially regarding the feed. And as I talk about the feed, it makes me think back to a film that I got to watch. We all, if you haven't seen it, if you feel guided to and that's your thing, you like that type of genre, I would implore you to see that as well. But the movie Sinners, when it talked about the vampires and we watched that, I mean, I had a time like so many others who chimed in and expanded on, the film and reviewed it. I myself had my own things to think about, and I'm going to watch it again just in case if there were some things that I missed because there was so much. I saw it in the theaters, and so, when one scene played, that scene played. But that's a movie that I definitely want to get my hands on and have it, in my classics, my library, and just my portfolio of favorites. But when I think about the vampires, I had such a time thinking about what it means for us in humanity. And I think about the feed, right? And I thought about the vampires and how they survive off the thirst of, continuing to thirst for blood. And I think about us as humans in this very moment. You hear a lot of people talk about energy vampires. I myself may have mentioned it on this platform, but it's something that I came to awareness when I had my awakening. I realized, and I would pick up on the verbiage and the actions of others, like, okay, this clearly is someone that is an energy vampire. They just want to suck you dry and move on accordingly and, wear that energy. And it's like, no, it's closed. I withdraw and I call all of my power and my energy back just like that. But I really had that awareness. And what it made me see was that we hold the power as people and not seriously power to the people, because without us sharing our content, there would be no feed. There would be no algorithm specifically. We are the algorithm. And I can't think of the words that I used, some time ago regarding Wi Fi, but I want you all to realize we are all walking intelligence. We are the internet. We are the ones who make connections. And I also said something about connections, recently as well. Like the earth thrives off of connection. The earth spins, moves. I mean, just think about it. Connection. I recently said everything is connected. And what is it that humanity is so vividly and clearly suffering from at this time? What is missing? Genuine connection. There's a lack thereof. There's a major disconnect. We're not in alignment with the planet or the planets because for some reason, many feel that it is demonic and we're separate from what takes place outside of this very orbit. But everything that happens in this galaxy connects to all things and impacts us on an energetic level. We all vibrate, whether it be high or low. And I just wanted to share that as we all continue to navigate through the shadow band, through the limitations, through the oppression and the utter chaos that we continue to see. I mean, it's gotten ridiculous. We must remember that we hold the power as people. You, me, we all do. And at this time, I've been also thinking about what life was like before social media, before we consumed so much instead of creating. And that's another important part of this thing called life that is missing. We've become complete consumers when we are naturally born creators. It has to shift on this planet. And with transitions, life, death, there will be impact. And with that impact, once again, comes a shift. And I'm going to leave this episode here because I feel like I've already, gone on and on once again about these topics. And I really feel genuinely that things could be taken away from this. My hope for the community is for everyone to stay grounded. And until next time, loves, stay genuine. Peace.